towards the end of the show, but starting off today, continuing as promised the NFL free agency grades, we are covering the NFC East today, and as with last time, we are going to be giving the grades first before we spiel about these teams, and of course we're going in alphabetical order again, so let's start with the Dallas Cowboys, who get a C+. The Cowboys' main goal this offseason was first and foremost to re-sign Dak Prescott. And they did re-sign Dak Prescott, but because of Jerry Jones and his inability or his stubbornness in not wanting to pay Dak Prescott 1 to 2 years ago, it ended up being a $40 million contract with a bunch of voidable years instead of a $30 to $35 million contract, which would have been much more viable, especially with the fact that the salary cap actually depreciated in value this offseason. So, much to Jerry Jones' chagrin, he signed Dak, multiple years, $40 million, lots of money guaranteed, and that's great, for the Cowboys in terms of getting that free agency signing done, nip it in the bud, and then just go and move on and focus on other parts of the team. But the product of quality on Dak's performance on the field, it's going to be continuing to be debated. Some people think he's great. Some people think he's not so great. I'm kind of in the middle of him. I've said from the very beginning, I don't think he's a $40 million a year quarterback, although it's not necessarily up to the talent. It's really what the market is for a quarterback, and the market was at $40 million. But I think he's just right around the middle. Regardless of that, they got the quarterback. We'll see with some returning members, some cast members of that offense, if it could be just as good as it was in the first 5 weeks that Dak was playing last season. Other than that, the Cowboys more or less were relatively quiet. They did re-sign 2 out of the 3 cornerbacks that were free agents on their roster. They re-signed CJ Goodwin and Jordan Lewis. They let go of Chidobe Awuzie, who left for Cincinnati. And the Cowboys also signed Keanu Neal from Atlanta. Although Neal is a little bit injury prone, he was a key part of Dan Quinn's defense when he was the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously, Dan Quinn is now the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. So that's going to be a plug and release piece later. It's a 1-year deal, I think, for $5 million, something along that line. So it's going to be a 1-year deal. Have Keanu Neal come in, see if he can still play, see if he can remain healthy, and if there are better options down the road, they can definitely exchange Neal if they wanted to. And as I said, other than that, the Cowboys were relatively silent. Their main thing was re-signing Dak and making sure that they can try and keep some of their cornerbacks that were going to leave in free agency, and the addition of Neal is nice. They are going to have to really nail on their draft picks, however, if they are going to be contenders, and that's why they are only getting a C+ for their free agency offseason for 2021. Moving on to the Eagles, who get a C-. The Eagles overall have had a really disastrous season and beginning to the offseason. I've talked about it a lot on the show. Those of you who have been listening to the show for a couple of months now know that I've been trashing the Eagles a little bit over the course of the past few months. But in terms of this free agency period, the Eagles really didn't do too bad. Their biggest signing was Anthony Harris from Minnesota on a 1-year, $5 million deal. Ideally, he isn't going to be sticking around for the long term, but Harris is still one of the best safeties. He was one of the best safeties on the market. And they got him at a good price, considering that Minnesota franchise tagged him last year at its price tag of $11 million. So to get him at 1 year at $5 million is a great deal for the Eagles, especially since Harris is going to be on a rebound year. Really great deal for the Eagles. I was really surprised to see that. The Eagles released Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson, who were both really notable names, but realistically speaking, they weren't doing much in Philadelphia. And those will probably wind up as good releases. So the Eagles, obviously, they let go of Carson Wentz. They traded Carson Wentz. They're letting go a couple of wide receivers. And they signed Anthony Harris. They let go, who is going to be replacing Jalen Mills, who went to New England. So there's going to be a lot more subtraction than addition for the Eagles this offseason. But most of their subtraction is something that you could take a look at the roster and say, yeah, okay, that subtraction actually made sense. And it's going to be rough for Philadelphia for a while, but now the Eagles really need to focus on getting some more wide receiver help, which if the Eagles don't take a wide receiver with their first selection in the NFL draft this season, I can imagine that Philadelphia sports fans are going to be getting their pitchforks, because Jalen Reagor, I don't think, is going to be cutting it as the number one guy. They're going to need to go after a number one wide receiver this offseason. And especially with the dropping of Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson, it's even more evident. But regardless of that, Eagles didn't really have much to do this offseason. A lot of subtraction, or rather a lot of addition by subtraction. They only get a C- for this offseason. Moving on to the Washington football team, who get the first A+ so far in terms of my free agency grades. They get the first A+. I've been saying on the podcast for a while that the Washington football team are going to be really, really good. Look out for the Washington football team if they continue to stick with the Washington football team name. Look out for Washington. I thought they were in prime position to be one of the best teams in the division this upcoming season. And with the free agency that they just had, man, they are in the position to potentially be like the best team in the division for multiple years to come. And it's really geared on what they can do at quarterback. Obviously, they signed Ryan Fitzpatrick from Miami, who's going to be a short-term quarterback. They tenured Kyle Allen, and Taylor Heineke got a 2-year extension. So there are options there. It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the draft if they do decide to go after a quarterback. I've been praising Matt Jones going to the Washington football team. If they can bring that together, I think that would be a great combination. But regardless of that, again, we already talked about Ryan Fitzpatrick. Washington's biggest signings were Curtis Samuel from Carolina, Adam Humphries from Tennessee. Both those receivers are going to be an excellent addition to what I already thought was an underrated wide receiver core. In addition to Logan Thomas, the tight end, there was some article that was run by on the Washington football team now having 2 out of the top 25 wide receivers from the past couple seasons and like the number 6 tight end. So the Washington football team offense is going to be scary good next season. Washington also nabbed the best cornerback on the market in William Jackson III on a good value deal. He'll be replacing Ronald Darby, who left for Denver. And in my mind, by itself, William Jackson is a huge upgrade over Ronald Darby. I thought the Ronald Darby was a bit of a stretch signing for Denver when I talked about them in the AFC West video, if you want to go back and watch my grades for those teams. Washington did sign former Giants linebacker David Mayo, and they do have some work to do with working things out with some other linebackers of their own that are free agents, specifically Brian Kerrigan and Reuben Foster. But Washington has done a really good job this offseason. Now, the question is if they go after another QB in the draft. They do have some holes to fill, but I am very confident that, especially with a majority returning cast on defense and with the addition of William Jackson, that this defense is going to be incredibly good again, and they got much better on offense. This is an A+ for Washington in terms of their free agency off-season grade. And last but not least, there is the Giants. The Giants free agency, before I get started, the Giants get a B+ for this year's free agency. They were very expensive signings, or expensive dealings rather, for New York this offseason, but if these signings pan out, this has really put the Giants in a position to be just under the Washington football team in terms of playoff contention, especially with that additional playoff slot. They really added some great members on the offensive side of the ball with Kyle Rudolph coming over from Minnesota. And of course, the big signing that everybody wants to talk about, Kenny Golladay, 4 years, $72 million coming over from Detroit. Defensively, the Giants needed to re-sign Leonard Williams, and they did that. Again, very expensive, but he is without a doubt the leader of that defense and was their best defensive player last season. The Giants also signed Adoree Jackson from the Titans, so he will be a good piece again. Expensive, but a great piece to line up across from Bradbury. The Giants do need some more offensive line help, so maybe they take a lineman with their first pick the first selection that they have in the NFL draft, maybe Rashawn Slater, who has played both tackle and guard in college with Northwestern. So really, this season, as I've said before in the show, is about making sure Daniel Jones gets the best chance of success. This is the best chance at success that Daniel Jones has had so far in a Giants uniform. They've gone out and gotten some really good pieces. They did lose Dalvin Tomlinson to Minnesota, who was a really key piece of that defensive line, but he can be replaceable with time. The Giants get a B+ for this offseason, and that were the grades for the NFC East in terms of the 2021 free agency. What did you think? Did I miss a signing? Did I get a grade wrong? Do you agree or disagree with those? Make sure that you let me know in the comment section below. that we will be covering the NFC. Which direction do we want to go? Do we want to go north or south? Let's go south. Let's cover the NFC South next show. So if your team is in the NFC South, make sure you are on the lookout for that segment. Hey folks, thank you so much for listening to this segment from the Hard-Headed Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed this segment, make sure that you drop a like on the video and a comment. It helps me out a bunch. And if you're interested in watching more segments like this from the show after the show has been completed, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should listen to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Once again, thank you so much for watching the video. My name is Nick Ryan, and I will see you all again very soon.